Sveiki 15 min skaitytojai ir žiūrovai, aš esu Paulius Ramonauskas, o 15 min studijoje šiandien turime amerikiečių režisierius Zaką Ingrasį ir Chrisą Temple, kurie pabėgėlių teisėmis mėnesį gyveno tarp sirų pabėgėlių Jordanijoje, apie pabėgėlių krizę artimuosiuose rytuose ir jų Lietuvoje rodomą filmą Salam, kaimyne šnekėsimės čia. Tačiau pokalbis vyks angliškai, o tiems, kurie anglų kalba sunkiai sektųsi šį pokalbį, patariame skaityti 15 min portale esantį interviu. So, guys, you call yourself accidental filmmakers, right?
Yeah.
Making no profits besides covering production costs, going to no film school. How this all started?
So it's actually, Zach and I met back in college, and we were actually studying international development and poverty alleviation. And for us, it was the issues that really sparked us into filmmaking. So we actually came up with an idea to live on $1 a day ourselves for a summer in a rural village in Guatemala, to do research on how over 1 billion people around the world live on $1 a day. And it was really just about learning, about understanding, being in the community. And while we were there, we filmed a few short video blogs, and just like, I think put them up on YouTube, and they ended up getting over 700,000 views on YouTube, and showed us that, hey, people want to watch this. People are interested in our style of storytelling as a way to learn about these issues. So from there, it took us about 2 more years, but we put together a documentary that's also available on Netflix called Living on $1, and kind of started our film career.
I see, but going back to your movie, Salam Neighbor, which is being showed right now in Lithuania, I mean, the name of the movie itself shows the underlying idea of the movie, that you wanted to live besides the Syrian refugees. Why? Why did you think that was significant to spend so much time besides Syrian refugees?
It's a great question. When we started this project, it was 2013, so we were seeing already that the Syrian crisis was the largest crisis since World War II, but most of the coverage was focused on the violence and the conflict itself, not on the millions of people that had walked away from war. And we had met this incredible woman who actually inspired the whole project. Her name was Salam, and she was the daughter of Palestinian refugees. And when she explained what it means to be forced to flee your country, what it means to have to restart your life, oftentimes without the same rights as citizens, we became very interested. And we realized that maybe if we had the time to really listen and create a dialogue and have a space where we could really come together, we could create something interesting. And that's what this project is about, is going to this camp, having that time, and it became the first filmmakers to be registered and given a tent inside of a refugee camp.
I'm also interested, how did you manage to pull it off? Because I know that even entering a refugee camp for a foreigner is pretty tough, and like living there for a month should be even more challenging.
Yeah, the idea is one part, and then execution's a lot harder, right? So it took us about 8 or 9 months of planning to actually, one, understand the kind of from an academic perspective refugee issues and what was happening in Syria. 2, to build the team. So we brought together Arab producers on the film. So it was kind of Arabs and Americans coming together to create this. And we thought that was very important to learn the culture and kind of get that perspective. And then 3rd, we had to work with the United Nations and the Jordanian government to allow us to be in this camp. And thankfully, after a number of months and kind of continuing to put together proposals and working with them, we were able to find a way to make it happen in Zatari refugee camp, which is the largest Syrian refugee camp in the world, and about 85,000 people on the Jordanian border.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you again, like, what's significant about Zatari, besides being the largest Syrian refugee camp?
I think there's a number of things that are really interesting about Zatari. One is that it grew so quickly, right? It's probably the most covered camp in the media, because thousands of people, as they were streaming over the border of Jordan, were put there first. And so there was a lot of chaos. There was, there were a lot of protests in the early years. It got a reputation as being one of the worst camps in the world, but that has changed a lot. and that when we arrived in 2014, it already had a multi-million-dollar economy. There were over 3,000 businesses. You could buy a wedding dress. There was even like a pizza delivery service. We have no idea how you would. There's no addresses on tents. So Syrians are incredibly innovative, and we started to see that Syrians were creating almost an organic city, whereas the UN had attempted to build a camp.
And Oxfam has just recently called Zaatari the fourth biggest city in Jordan.
Right.
But like, why people are resisting, or why would they not want to call Zaatari for what it is becoming, like a city, a Jordanian city?
Yeah, well, I think you put yourself in the perspective of Jordan for a second. Just the sheer numbers of people that have come over the border. Jordan has now about 20%, or a little bit less, of the population are Syrian refugees. So imagine that, where you're getting so many people coming into your country in such a short amount of time, that there's a lot of pressure from Jordanians on the government to make sure that that this population isn't there forever. That eventually people can go back home. So avoiding calling Zaatari a city makes it feel less permanent. And that's something that a lot of these countries have to do because there is a lot of pressure on them. And really, we talk a lot about how this is really a crisis in 5 major countries: Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Turkey, and Jordan. I don't know if I said that one, but Egypt. And where you have over 85% of Syrian refugees are in those main 5 countries. And so they're the ones that really need the support from the international community financially, and from private companies to make sure that they can help Syrian refugees in their own country.
I see, but how that makes the refugees feel? That they know that they can't call this a city, they know that they can't call this their home. Mm-hmm. What do they feel, and what do they think? What are their plans?
It's interesting talking to our friends, and I think this has changed over time. So when we first arrived, and people will still tell you this, everyone wants to go back to Syria. That's the first thing they say. And a lot of people are willing to stay in Zaatari because, especially in the beginning, because they felt like they were going to go back pretty quickly. No one expected this conflict to be going on for, it's going to be the 6-year mark in March. And now, when we went back to show the film, so we actually showed the film to our friends before we released it to make sure that they were comfortable with the film. Many more of them want to be resettled. Many of them more of them are looking for a different future. And so I think people are frustrated. I think people are bored. What we found is, just providing these basic needs like shelter and tents and food isn't enough, right? It's not enough for a life. And on average, refugees are displaced for 17 years, which is a lifetime for someone like, a young child, and that's a long time. And so we should be thinking about long-term strategies. And politically it can be tough, but hopefully that's what we're moving forward to.
See, I know you spent a few days traveling around Lithuania and showing your film Salam Neighbor, and in many cities, and talking to different kind of audience. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us how people received the movie and the refugees issues here in Lithuania?
Yeah, it's our first time to Lithuania, so it's been super fun to travel around the country, and we even ate our first Stat Oil hot dog last night.
It was good.
Great. Ate 2 of them each, actually. But no, I mean, we've traveled to a number of different cities around the country, all the way to Klaipėda, and at every event so far, people have turned up. So we've had sold out events at every screening, and 2, we've noticed a lot of curiosity where people are wanting to learn about, wanting to engage with the Syrians that are coming to Lithuania, where Lithuania has announced that we'll be resettling over 1,100 Syrian refugees here to Lithuania. So far, already 254 Syrians have come into the country, and many are in these communities that we're speaking to. Some actually even came to our screenings, which was amazing to be able to, even at this one event, have people get to meet Syrian refugees, interact with one another, and hopefully get to know one another, which is what both sides want. Syrians want to get to know Lithuanian culture, and Lithuanians need to kind of gain that context of where Syrians are coming from.
That's great actually to hear, and it's kind of surprising for me because there are some Lithuanians who are very much against the refugees arriving from, let it be Iraq or Syria, to Lithuania. And let me tell you what they say about refugees. Firstly, that they're not refugees, they're migrants. Secondly, that they might have links to terrorism or be violent. And thirdly, that Islamic culture pretty much has no place in Lithuania, whatever that means. But what could you tell those people? How could you change their minds?
Well, first I would say that fear is understandable. You know, I think before we went to this camp, we were also afraid. All we had seen in the media was war and violence and terrorism, and with those stories, it's almost impossible not to be afraid.
Yeah.
We had never met Syrian refugees before, but as soon as we arrived, we were immediately welcomed. You can see this in the film. I mean, they helped us set up our tent. We were invited for tea, and as soon as we were able to put a face, like a real person's story, to these statistics, you know, most of that fear went away. And if you look at statistics, you know, it is a very, very small percentage of people that are involved in terrorism. You know, these are 4.8 million people who've walked away from war, who've been forced to flee their country because of violence, and most of them are coming from very well-educated backgrounds, a lower middle income country, and I think the more we know, the less we fear.
And sadly, they're the ones who are the primary people being affected by this violence, by groups like ISIS or Daesh. They're fleeing that type of violence, and it's amazing when the world can step up and provide those homes. And so that's on kind of that misconception you brought up. The second one I think is a concern was that you brought up religion. And I think one thing, not all Syrian refugees are Muslim. So I think that that's something that all of us should remember too. Actually, yesterday we had a great Skype conversation with a number of Syrian students who are Christian here, and they were talking about actually how funny they think it is that everybody assumes that they're Muslim when they're actually Christian. So I think, again, we can learn from that. And two, I think we've seen this across the US as well, is once people get to interact with somebody from a different religion or a different background, there's a lot we can learn from it. And that's one of the things that we think is great about currently the diversity in America is that you can have people from all different backgrounds together in one place.
Chris, at one point, the trailer, at least I saw it, that you broke to tears and you said you don't want to talk and you don't want to be filmed at that point. What was the moment that struck you so hard?
Yeah, so it was a really emotional experience being a part of this camp, even for 30 days, hearing the stories that people had been through. And there was one child in particular, a 10-year-old boy named Rauf, who we became especially close with.
He's really the star of the film.
He is. He's and he was kind of our first little friend. We're driving into the camp on the first day, setting up our tent, and he comes from the tent next to us and helps Zach, dig ditches around the outside of our tent and shows us kind of where the bread distribution is. And he's like our little informal guide at 10 years old. And he was with us for the first couple weeks and always smiling, always happy. And he'd been out of school for about 2 years, which happens to many refugee kids. About 50% of Syrian refugee kids aren't in school. So a new semester was starting, and we actually walked with him to school. He was going to go to school for the first time. It was this really exciting moment, very positive. And he's walking into the classroom, and in the doorway, he just breaks down into tears. And he literally couldn't cross back into the classroom. His body was shaking. And we spoke to his dad, who told us that back in Syria, his school had been bombed. And the idea of getting into the classroom again was just painful. It was traumatic. And he wasn't yet ready to get back into the classroom. And I think we realized in that moment, it really just overwhelmed us as all these stories built up, that you realize even if somebody is hopeful, is trying their best to rebuild their life, underneath the surface, just below that, is this deep-seated trauma that families have experienced and kids like Rauf have experienced. And it's really, his generation right now is at risk. If we're not willing to help a kid like him heal and help him get back into school, for example, through psychosocial support, through art, through healing. And we are thankful to say that he is back in school now. We got to go back recently, and he's
giving
back
away all the film, but that's all right.
He's back in school, but it's it's an important thing to kind of have him have him be able to move forward like that, because whenever, if ever, this war in Syria ends, his generation is going to be the ones to go back and rebuild.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. And I want to ask you, what do the refugees out there, and what do they lack to prove that kind of people who are skeptical towards them? What do they need? Like, they need more money, they need more education? What, and how in general we could help them out?
There are a lot of needs. Zatari in some ways is a better situation than a lot of the crisis, especially in Lebanon, where there are no formal camps. There's very, 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 people in Lebanon are Syrian refugees, and so there still is this basic needs that we need to meet, right? Shelter, food, water, protection. But now, because we've hit our 5th year, and it's more than that, right? We need to provide opportunity. So that means investing in countries like Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and Iraq. And part of that solution is actually resettlement, which is why it's amazing to be here in Lithuania, because Lithuanians can actually volunteer. I mean, you can meet someone who's gone through this experience. You can welcome them, and a couple of people who've been on this trip, Lithuanian Red Cross and Caritas, both work directly with refugees in Lithuania, and they're looking for volunteers. They're looking for people who can support their work, and it also provides Lithuanians with an opportunity to hear these stories for themselves and make their own decisions of who refugees are, which is amazing. And it's the same thing that we've been pushing in the United States, because most communities also have welcomed in refugees and desperately need volunteers.
I've checked it out on the crowdfund website, and your movie has raised over $150,000, if I'm correct, right? 153.
Correct.
And, yeah, some dollars. What are you going to do with that money, and how it helps the refugees?
So what's great is any money that's raised on that CrowdRise site that you saw there goes directly to one of 3 organizations. So the Save the Children, that's working with psychosocial support and children like Rauf. The International Rescue Committee, that's doing amazing work, especially empowering women who are very vulnerable in this crisis. And then the third is the UN Refugee Agency, that is really the mastermind who's coordinating these camps and all the programs and providing shelter and safety to people. And so when somebody comes to our website, if you go to salamneighbor.org and you hit donate, you can choose one of these 3 organizations to give to, and those are the programs that currently are getting supported thanks to donors who are willing to be a part of this.
And we were so inspired by their work after experiencing it in the camp that we then chose to create those partnerships. And again, we don't take any of that money. It goes directly to their work.
I see. And I know that you told us that you have visited the camp even after having produced and having aired the movie. How has it changed, like the camp, for better or worse, and also the lives of the characters from your movie, like Rauf and others?
Yeah, so there's some positive updates, like Rauf being back in school, and also through just individuals who are interested in the film or who saw it, we've been able to privately raise enough money to resettle Ismail and Gassam's families to Canada. So they're currently in the process of getting resettled to go to Antigonish, Nova Scotia in
which is
northeast.
Equally as cold as Lithuania.
Exactly, in northeast Canada. So there is some positive elements like that, but I think there was a kind of a sad resignation to the fact that this crisis just continues to move on. That it was the 5th year. People are still in this camp, and while our film shows a lot of the incredibly entrepreneurial elements of this refugee camp, of people starting businesses, which is definitely happening, there is an idle boredom to being in a refugee camp. You're stuck in a 1.5 kilometer by 3 kilometer space. You've got very limited access to work. There's very limited access to internet and online education. And so much of your day is spent without that much to do. And what we're so frustrated by is that that's a waste of the human potential, where Syrians are going to be the ones who rebuild their country, and they are really the solution to this refugee crisis. If given the chance, they can positively be contributing in the countries that are providing them homes. And we've seen some of this research actually demonstrate this around the world, coming out of the Oxford Refugee Center, and really demonstrating that because, especially the Syrian population, they're technologically connected, they're coming from educated backgrounds, and they can contribute if we let them.
I see, that's great to hear, and we really appreciate your effort, guys, great effort, and thank you for your answers. O 15 min skaitytojams norėtume priminti, kad šį vakarą 18 val. Menų fabrike Loftas visi nemokamai gali pamatyti Zako Ingrasi ir Chriso Temple filmą Salam, kaimyne. Ačiū Jums uždėmesį, čia buvo Paulius Ramonauskas.